Let me say a few words about our guest this evening. Gawain Towler set out on his political journey initially as a member of the Conservative Party. At university, he was chairman of the University of York Conservative and Unionist Association. He stood for the Tories at the 2001 general election and in the 2003 Scottish Parliament elections. In 2004, Nigel Farage recruited him to UKIP as his press officer, and Gawain went on to lead its media operations from there on in, became the key spin doctor, really, and quite a figure around the Westminster Village as a consequence. He stood for UKIP in the 2009 and 2014 European Parliament elections. He, from 2019 onwards, was one of Nigel Farage's most trusted advisors. He was Director of Communications for the Brexit Party, and then for Reform UK until 2024. Today, he's no longer really a behind-the-scenes man. As I said, he's been elected to Reform's board. He makes very regular appearances on our TV screens, typically on matters relating to Reform UK, and is a much sought-after speaker at Reform UK events up and down the land. He's also been a drinking buddy of mine for more years and more pints than I care to remember. So, Gawain, it's great to have you with us, my friend. How the very devil are you doing?
Well, it is entirely true. In fact, I seem to recall spending many, many hours trying to convince you to become a Eurosceptic. So, hey, that worked.
That worked, yeah.
I'm all right, though. That there may be, and I'm just warning the audience, there may be one or two times I have to scoot off at high speed. But
only temporarily, if you do
only
need to
very
scoot off at high speed.
in and out in seconds. Yeah. No, things are fascinating. Things are. It's been very weird since hauling myself from the wrong side of the camera to the right side of the cameras, or the other way around in the last year. But it's a transition I've quite enjoyed.
Good.
The country is changing rapidly, and we shall see if that has the political impact I think it will.
Great. Well, as I was pondering just an hour or so ago, it's obviously been a very quiet time in British politics. I don't know what the hell we're going to talk about, Gawain. I'm sure we'll find a way of filling the hour. But let's start with the news today. If you're watching on Catch Up, we're talking on the evening of Monday, the 15th of September. And Danny Kruger, Tory MP for East Wiltshire, announced this morning he's going over to Reform UK. He's been put in charge of their department for preparing for government. Another defection from the Conservatives to Reform UK, and quite a significant one. I think this is the first sitting Conservative MP to defect over to Reform UK. Danny was also Robert Jenrick's campaign manager in the leadership election between Badenoch and Jenrick. What do we make of this, Gawain? Obviously, you're going to say it's seismic and incredible and monumental and a turning point in history, aren't you?
It's significant. It is absolutely significant. To my mind, it's more significant than in 2014 when Douglas Carswell joined UKIP, mainly because Carswell did so from a position on the periphery of the then Parliamentary Conservative Party. And the UKIP was essentially at that point a pressure group to get one single thing done. This time, it's somebody who's at the very heart of the Conservative Party on the backbenches. And it is somebody who is one of the intellectual heavyweights of the Tory party. He's not excitable in any way. He's never been perceived to be as such. He was on my wish list, but not on my hope list.
Yes, that's interesting. I mean, most people didn't have him high up the defection watch list, or I guess your recruitment list. Yeah, he wasn't in the top 4 or 5 on that, I don't think.
No, but he was certainly on my wish list. His seriousness, but the seriousness with which he approaches his parliamentary duties, there may be disagreements on his position on the assisted dying bill, but the way that he performed during that process, day after day, the hard work, line after line, was an exemplary example of what a backbencher can do and should do. And that attention to detail is something that we will enjoy to having on board. I mean, without a shadow of a doubt. This is somebody who knows the ropes. He worked at number 10. We need that level of experience. He's extremely important to us on a number of reasons. And he also comes across as a thoroughly nice bloke, and that is also a good thing. There doesn't seem to be a prickly side to him, which I think is going to be very important.
Yeah,
He
I've met him
also
once or twice. He's definitely a very cerebral sort of guy. I've had
is.
lunch with a couple of times. He is a deep thinker. He therefore interacted quite a lot with think tanks. He's very interested in policy detail. He's
He
quite
was
a catch
policy
for you
director of
guys,
the
I think.
CPS, wasn't he?
Yeah,
That's when I first met him. Was when he was that. So he's been doing interesting stuff. He was a lead writer on the Telegraph for years, and so on and so forth. He has a great deal of bottom, as they used to say. Now, and also it's interesting, if you think in Wiltshire, in the East Wiltshire, whilst Reform picked up some council seats in his patch, and he mentioned in his speech today the regret he had for some of the Reform taking Tory council seats at that time. During the general election in Wiltshire, where I was based at the time, his was the one constituency where it was hard to get reformers to go out fighting.
right.
Because they liked him. And his track record, his voting track record over the last few years, what he was saying in public, very much chimes with the broader agenda that Reform have. Really, he should have been much higher on everybody's watch list, given his voting record, given what he's been saying over the last few years. So it's a surprise, but not a shock.
Yeah. And I guess from your perspective, a very welcome surprise. Tell me a bit about this department for preparing for government. And you've got the UK equivalent of Doge as well, with Zia running the Department of Government Efficiency. I mean, this all sounds a sensible thing to do. I just query a bit about what is the actual size of this department. Is it Danny just thinking, or is it really a department? When I was at the IEA, I was very fond of setting up units and telling people they were head of the unit and telling them it was called a unit because there was only one of them. What is the department for preparing for government within the Reform Party?
I think it may be a unit at this precise moment, but it's a unit that has certainly already started reaching out before Danny joined us, and there are increasing numbers. I've had people, but there are increasing numbers of people reaching out to us saying, we want to help. How do we develop? When David Jones, who may, I believe, be on this call, came and got in touch and we started speaking to him, it was very much a case of, it's not about me. It's about me looking at the country and saying, you need the help of somebody who's had ministerial cabinet responsibility in order to get the thing done, because we are acutely aware that it's all very well winning an election, and I think we will, but delivering is the hard bit. And people with that level of experience are vital, but also people are coming to us because people who are patriots want any government to do well. I don't think any of us, well, maybe a little bit, are enjoying the travails of Labour government.
Oh, I'm enjoying it quite a lot.
Yes,
I'll be honest with you.
We don't want the country to be
I agree.
We actually want them to succeed to a certain extent, because their failure means the failure of our country.
No, I agree with all of that. So quite a coup for you today. And obviously, Reform has had a pretty spectacular time of it since the general election, basically. Just so some people are asking me in the chat, just so I can re-rehearse my own arguments. My kind of view in July last year was the Tories were going to get a shellacking, but the Conservatives were going to come second in vote share, definitely form the opposition. And whilst I had huge sympathy for the Reform UK platform and propositions, my sort of guess was, well, yeah, I mean, you're just the sort of ideological gadflies. You're not really going to get anywhere. And it might mean that Labour gets a super majority rather than a narrow majority. There was no way the Tories were going to win. But obviously circumstances have shifted, I mean, enormously, right? I mean, the Reform vote has more than doubled since the general election, if you believe the opinion polls. And the Conservatives, from 24% of the vote at the general election, supposedly, the lowest they've ever got in a democratic.
That was their base, mate.
The party's gone backwards since then, right? So I remember talking to you about, what John Curtis or you thought the ceiling might be for reform votes. Was it 20%, 25%, 30%? I think there was an
A
opinion
year
poll
or so
yesterday.
ago, a year and a half ago, Curtis was saying 9%. So,
Right.
as
So
I
up
say,
by a factor of nearly 4 against that. I'm also trying to work out what the floor is for the Tory party, right?
I don't think we're there yet. I
That's
really
quite
don't think we're there
extraordinary.
yet. I think you talk about in the polling, in opinion polls, and some opinion polls have put us on 35%. Some opinion polls have put us more than the Tories and Labour put together. This is extraordinary.
Yeah.
But what's even more extraordinary is the results in local by-elections since then, and since May, in fact. We did really well in May in the local elections. 41% of seats that were contested went to Reform. That's crazy. And yet we're doing better than that since then. In the by-elections, the vote shares are significant. And interestingly, we are still taking votes off the Tories and still increasing our votes hit against the Tories, but we're doing far better in Labour areas.
Yeah.
So next year's elections will be very, very interesting. And it's something I've been saying, but Nigel said it today in the press conference. After May, it's highly likely the Conservative Party ceased to be a national political party.
In that
they'll be wiped out in Scotland.
They might get, and I don't know how many mayoral elections are coming up in May as well. There's
a whole bunch of those new ones, but we will be targeting those mayoral elections very, very seriously. Hampshire, Sussex. I have a dream. Said somebody once, but I have a dream that the good people of Brighton will wake up with a Sussex mayor with a teal rosette.
Wow, there's a prediction for you.
Yeah. But Croydon, maybe other places. There's a significant, and then you've got counties probably up in Essex, Suffolk. These are not places that are untarget areas for reform.
Sure.
When we're talking about beyond our shores, in the sense of beyond our political shores, and the threats to Starmer of Burnham, they have to find a safe seat.
Yeah, this is the bit I couldn't get my head around. I mean, given that you won which was at Runcorn and Helsby off Labour, which was a very, very safe seat.
And we've got to
work out the way Andy Burnham gets into Parliament. Somebody steps aside for him, forces a by-election that doesn't need to happen, which you would have thought the voters in that seat might not take kindly to. And given the state of the opinion polls, Burnham might well lose to a Reform candidate. One would have thought.
I mean, Angie, she'll lose. Lucy Pell will lose. In current polling, I just don't. Where will Burnham stand? I mean, it's very.
Well, maybe they need to find a Scottish seat, do they?
We're ahead of the Labour in Scotland as well.
Right. Okay. It's a bit of a thorny problem for them. So that's one that Andy Burnham's new think tank needs to get its head around. Anyway, let's leave the travails of the Labour Party to them. I wanted to talk a bit about recent developments in Reform. So I went up with some of the PopCon team and we held a couple of events at Reform Conference. I was pretty impressed by it. Obviously, I can compare it to other party conferences, but my big comparison was with the UKIP conference at the Doncaster Racecourse, probably in about 2014, which was delightful, but very spit and sawdust. Can I put it that way? Very spit and sawdust. Whereas the one a couple of weeks ago was, a very impressive, professional, colossal, event, basically. I mean, it felt a bit more like being at a jazz festival than being at a party conference.
It was still more rally than conference compared to other parties. But more conference than rally compared to our previous ones recently.
Yes, that's interesting. I mean, there was I think it was the biggest fringe program for a while.
That we've ever had by a long shot. I was amazed that you could hear yourself think in the fringes, because the fringes were loud at certain times. I was having meetings and the cheering going on in some of the fringe meetings was extraordinary. I think the William Rees, Jacob and David Starkey's press thing had 450 people turning up. I mean, these were significant
Yeah, we
significantly
were
better.
quite pleased with ours. I mean, although we'll be writing a stiff letter to Reform HQ because having paid you guys quite a big chunk of money, Nigel Farage then decided at the last moment to clash his speech against our
Well,
fringe
yeah,
group. But actually, only by delaying it for 15 minutes, we packed it out with more than 300 people.
yeah, and that was what was interesting. Yes, the room was the conference hall was full for Nigel, but so were a bunch of the fringe meetings that were happening simultaneously. It was
Yeah, yeah,
extraordinary.
yeah.
But there was what was interesting about that aspect. I personally was very, very happy with how the conference went, sort of main stage down.
Mm-hmm.
Certain aspects of the main stage didn't interest me, and also I had certain questions. But main stage down, it was superb. The
Mm-hmm.
fringes, the mood, the attitude, even some of the merch was quite fun. The connection with business was there in a way that I've never seen before in all my years in the sort of the tribe. And talking to many of the business reps that turned up was extremely interesting, and how they were beginning to engage, realizing that the mood of the country has changed. They're still a bit reticent, but at the same time, even they're starting to wake up to reality. So that was fascinating and very positive. I've had a whole bunch of follow-up meetings since then with various business organizations. So that is ongoing.
And I would say my feel of it as well, which wouldn't have surprised you because you've been sort of, inside the party at its heart for ages. But I'm trying to put my finger on it because I think Nigel Farage has played a brilliant hand in dealing with the kind of Tommy Robinson set. I think he's got that bang on right. But nevertheless, I was expecting a bit more seething anger from Reform delegates. I was expecting it to be a bit feisty, but it was the most, I mean this in the most positive way possible. It was incredibly genteel, right? I mean, actually, people were desperate about the state of the country, but there was a kind of steely determination to put it right, and a rather calm determination to put it right.
The anger, there is anger, of course there is, but there's a realization that shouting doesn't necessarily get you anywhere.
Yeah,
And there is, and I would use those words myself. There is a steely determination, but one with a smile.
yeah, yeah,
That is what I think we do very well. And as with many things, many organizations, an organization takes the character of its leadership.
yeah,
And Farage is nothing if not self-deprecating. He has a sense of humor about himself and the world around him. He can laugh at himself.
hmm,
The politics is deadly serious. We not so much.
yeah, yeah,
We don't take ourselves as seriously. We're not po-faced, and we are. And of course, this was the first conference we've had since the elections in this year, since the massive step up. There are 800 plus councillors. We had 5, I think, this time last year. So there was a sense of celebration. A lot of people, you know what conferences are like. You don't see people for a year, and you meet at the time and have a drink
yeah,
and
yeah,
all the rest of it. There is that side, but there is there were 10 council leaders there.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, it was
This is
intriguing. I was really impressed by what was put on. I should just say, so see whether you agree with this. I'm going. Charles Hancock asked, because we'd said that Danny Kruger was the first sitting Conservative MP to defect to Reform. Charles Hancock said, wasn't Lee Anderson the first sitting MP to go to Reform?
Yes, he's right.
Yes, but he'd had the Tory whip withdrawn, right? So he went Tory independent.
Yes, that's
before.
true. He was the independent.
Where, yeah, I mean, idiocy by the Tory party to withdraw the whip from.
But it was interesting to hear again in the press conference this morning that Danny basically said, I first started thinking about it when Lee joined.
Yeah,
the conversations took place later, but Danny had started thinking about it then.
Yeah.
And I think that there's a number of former MPs who, on election night last year, watched Lee's result coming through and going, damn, why didn't I have the courage?
Yeah, really interesting that. So I guess this segues in a bit. David Silito, not really a question, more a demand, says, capture David Frost, please.
I saw that.
I assume he means attempt to seduce and recruit David Frost, unless you're actually press ganging people to join Reform UK, that's
I do go wandering around the pubs of Whitehall and drop the shilling into people's pipes.
yeah. So I guess what I was trying to tease out here is what's your criteria, either for you personally, or explain what the party or Nigel's approach is to who are the good Tories that you want to join Reform UK, and who are the wicked, evil, useless Tories that you don't want to join Reform UK? Because
Well,
clearly Nadine Dorries, Andrea Jenkins, Jake Berry, and Danny Kruger fit into the "we want them" category. But
Adam
Nigel also
Holloway,
said he turned down a whole range of others. So yeah, David Jones, Adam Holloway. But I'm just trying to work out. I was just trying to, what boxes does a Conservative Party member need to tick, either on ideology or on personality or on record in government, in order to be, yeah, we want that person, as opposed to, oh my God, we wouldn't touch him with a 6-foot barge pole.
I think there's a combination of things, and it depends on the individual, of course. There were lots of question marks when Jake Berry joined us.
Because he'd been Remain and pro-carbon net zero, for example. Yeah.
For example. But he also was headed up the Northern Powerhouse and a lot of communication contacts with business, which is something. And there is more joy in heaven, I believe. I'm not saying that the 27th floor of Millbank is actually heaven, but there is more joy in heaven for a sinner that has repented. And we understand, though it is at times, I put it a little bit like this. Betchman's poem of the church mouse?
Mm-hmm.
The church mouse sits there chewing on candle ends for 12 months of the year. And then for 1 week, all these people just rock up from the countryside. They come in, they come into his church because it's Harvest Festival. There's lots of food there. What are they doing there? Come on, I've been here all year. And there is that feeling from those of us who've been members a long time. What's going on? Why are you letting all these blighters in? They voted the wrong way, left, right, and centre. But there's also a realization. We have to win. Yeah. We have to win. And we're not going to win from the 40,000 members that were there at the general election in 2024. We're now on almost 250,000 members. We passed 245,000 this week. Mm-hmm. Many of those will have been Tories. Of course they will. Yeah. Many of them come from elsewhere. Many of them come from not voting at all, and all the rest of it.
But, well, we asked at our Fringe meeting, now this might be selection bias, because it might be that former Conservatives were more likely to come to a PopCon meeting, so I'm not saying it's representative, but impromptu, David Starkey asked the 200 or 300 people there, how many of you are ex-Tories? And about 75% put their hands in the air. That doesn't necessarily mean they were members of the Conservative Party, by the way. They might just have interpreted that as meaning
I suspect that of that 245,000, there's still probably about 15 to 20,000 who are still members of the Tory party, haven't given up their membership because they desperately want to vote for Robert Jenrick.
Yeah, I know some of them. Yeah,
I'm sure that's the case, and I'm sure in this room there are some who are in that bracket.
Yeah. Now, but you got elected, to the board of Reform UK. Yep. Congratulations! I think 3 of you got elected. Tell us a bit, because there's a number of questions here which I'll come to, some from Conservatives, some from Reformers, on the sort of structure of Reform UK, and perhaps you can tell us a little bit about what your role is. I'm not quite sure where sovereignty power lies.
I have to first warn you that on becoming a member of the board, we were shown the pearl-handled revolver and the unopened bottle of Lefroy, and basically said, if you start talking about what goes on in here, this is yours.
No, I get that. Sorry, I'm not asking you to disclose the minutes of your first board meeting. I'm just trying to work out what powers you've got.
If you look at the Constitution, the board has pretty substantial powers across everything in the party: policy, discipline, rules, structures, systems, the works. That being said, we've only had 1 meeting so far, and it's a brand new organization, and therefore we are yet to finalize and formulate exactly what the rules are and how we operate. Yeah. Obviously, the 3 members who were elected have our inbox with quite a few messages from our branches and members up and down the country. We are their representatives, but we are talking together to try and work out, okay, what is our formal role on the board? How do we take those queries and questions forward into the board? So
who else is on it? So you and two were elected by the membership.
Yeah. Darren Grimes is elected. Darren Grimes is elected. He's deputy leader of Durham Council, and obviously well known to the viewers of GB News and Vote Leave and all the rest of it.
Yeah.
And then you have a guy called Dan Barker, who was the Tories' mayoral candidate in Manchester at the last time, and then defected to us before that and became our mayoral candidate. He's been the Northwest Regional Organiser. I was delighted he got elected because, unlike Darren and myself, who have a national profile, he doesn't. So he got elected on the strength of the merits of his own worth. We got elected because of Stardust.
Because you're famous or infamous. Yeah.
Basically.
So I was really, there's you three. Who else is on that? Does Nigel get to appoint?
Obviously, the leader.
Yeah.
The leader, the chairman, David Ball, the deputy chairman, and Paul Nuttall. Paul Nuttall being in that role as deputy chairman for me is superb because pretty much everybody at head office has only known success. And having somebody who's seen how brutal politics can be and experienced it personally is something very, very useful, because it ain't going to be plain sailing all the way through. Having that experience is vital. Then you've got who else is on the board? You've got a couple of the officials of the party are ex officio members, non-voting. Andrew Reid, who's been around for a long time, is a lawyer. He was co-opted onto the board, so there's 9 members. So let's think that's one: Nigel, David, Paul, me. I think it's about it. Yeah. And Zia Yusuf, and Zia was an appointee as well.
Right. So, without getting into
Andrew Jenkins. Sorry, hold on. Andrew Jenkins was appointed by Nigel. So Andrea, Zia, and Paul Nuttall were appointed.
Got it. All right. I mean, I know most of these cats. Nice bunch of guys. But I guess one of the questions that Reform have been grappling with, and John Strafford asks a question here about it, who's been one of the most doughty campaigners for democracy within the Conservative Party. But John says, Reform is the only political party owned by a company. Will it ever be a democratic party where the members vote on policies and those running the party are electable and accountable to the members? Is that the model that you want to aspire to? And I appreciate you're still sort of in the startup phase. Or do you sort of think, well, the members have got to be listened to, but ultimately, we need a slick, fast, efficient political machine, and if kind of Nigel says jump, we've got to ask how high. And whilst we'll listen to feedback from the Bognor Regis branch, we really got to have Nigel and David Bull and Gawain in charge of everything. Which is it? Are you going to become a kind of unincorporated association or a club or a different entity or not?
I'm entirely up for me being in charge, of course, but beyond that, right, I think it's about 50-50. The need for speed, and there really is need for speed when it comes to policy development and all the rest of it, and the growth at the top, requires the ability to make executive decisions and for them to act fast. The need for the membership to be engaged fully in policy development and all the rest of it is also important. Now, the policy boards are being set up for each area of policy right now. People are being appointed to be sort of chairman of policy groups. There will be a lot of outreach, both externally and internally, for expertise, because I reckon in the 240,000, we've got a great deal of expertise, but we don't know who they are because it's so new. But if we have an entirely democratic process when it comes to voting for policies and all the rest of it, we will still be discussing policy 2 years after the general election is over. And we won't have got it together in time. We just can't afford to do that.
No, I get
that. Conference did have motions.
Yeah, I get that. But I mean, Cheryl Hennell makes a similar point. Good evening. There were calls earlier in this year for Reform to become a democratised party. I know Nigel made some changes, but Reform still seems to be a limited company rather than a party. Please, can you say when Reform might become an actual democratised political party? Now, the bit where I'm highly sympathetic to you, I'm not saying that, questions of what shade of teal should be on the rosettes needs to go out to a vote of the membership. And you can't have, will we let Danny Kruger join and set up this department? That's got to be a Farage thing. But you could write that into a party constitution, right? You could be clear what the powers of the leader was and his powers of appointment and patronage, and also then be clear what the powers of the membership were. And you could be as limited or extensive on the powers of the membership you want. You write it into a party constitution, and you don't need it doesn't need to be owned by some sort of separate company with 2 directors, does it?
The party board is the board of the party. It's the part. It governs the party now. It's no longer just Farage and Chum.
Right.
The board is that. It's the board of directors of the party, and 3 of which members are directly elected by the membership. So there has been significant steps in that direction. If you look at the constitution, particularly branch constitutions, the selection of candidates, which I think has been the great bedevilment of both the main political parties, the stripping of branches' right to select candidates has, I think, denuded people, denuded the parties, their ability to react to popular sentiment, and it becomes that. I mean, that's what's killed the Tory party. It's
been a disaster in the Tory party. It's been a complete farce.
Whilst people have to pass a vet to get onto our approved candidates list, it is highly unlikely that the party will be interfering in selection in branches. There will be, well, I mean, looking at current polls, about 450 people who might be sitting on green benches, and therefore there may be a few small select situations where the party wishes to encourage a branch to select a particular candidate. But I think the 90% at least of those seats, the branch will be making that decision, which I think is the fundamental democratic decision.
That's really interesting. Michelle Hume asked that. What will be the process for choosing parliamentary candidates for the next general election? Will it be based in part on local branch choice? And you're actually saying overwhelmingly so. Yeah.
The constitution, the branch constitution makes that very clear. The branch has the say. There is a caveat for the party to impose in very, very select circumstances. And I think that all 3 of us board members elected by the party have made it clear that this is something that we think is very, very important. And we will be pushing very strongly to make sure that that is a very limited situation, particularly given that Farage has said if he wants somebody in, then the fact that we're going to need X hundred peers allows him to bring people in that way. He doesn't have to impose them on the party. On branches. He could bring somebody on, and he said the possibility of governing certain departments from the Lords is absolutely possible. Like Cameron was made Foreign Secretary and a member of the House of Lords simultaneously. Under Rishi. So that is not out of the question. But it does mean that the imposition on branches is going to be far less, because that flexibility to bring in somebody that we particularly want but hasn't gone through the branch selection procedure isn't there. So I'm very confident, and it is something that I know as my position as a board member, it's the only promise I made that I would fight for that in my election.
Jeff Townley asked 2 questions. One question he asked was whether the person running on the pitch at the Southampton-Portsmouth game on Sunday was me. It was not, I can promise you that. The game was so tediously boring that I couldn't even bring myself to get out of my chair. It was so bad that I think my retinas are permanently scarred, frankly. So no, it wasn't. But he asked a more pertinent question. He says, but the branches of reform are not yet democratically elected. So in order to be the chairman of branch X, how's that decided?
We're still going through this process of creating the structure and the systems. There's the interim things that's not elected, and then you have, for a branch to become a formal branch, it goes from interim to full branch. At that point, all the branch officers are elected by the members in that branch. Now, many of the branches now have upwards of 500 members or more, given this growth like Topsy. And so, yes, but there are rules governing that. I believe, if I remember rightly, that if you are a branch chairman, you can't be the candidate.
Yep.
And I think that's quite important, because you can't have somebody building up a sort of a power base in their branch and then come the selection process. All my mates will vote for me. So I think that's quite an important and useful stricture to provide a little bit of check and balance there. But no, it is true that most of our branches are still interim branches. They have to have their EGM and have elected branch officers.
Got it. I'm going to put a poll up now for the assembled throng. We've got well more than 100 of you on the live call. We're going to ask you which party you're presently a member of, if any. We've got a couple of other questions coming up towards the end of the show about who you think is going to win the election. or both, as you say. You might. We haven't actually allowed that as an option because it's, I suppose. So are you Conservative and sticking with the Tories, Conservative but may leave, Reform and sticking with Reform, Reform but may leave, none other. I suppose also we should have had none other or both. Yeah. So just let us know. I'd be interested to see where this cohort's coming from. I want to focus on this bit because PopCon, although we're ecumenical, was born out of the Conservative Party, and a good number of people on the call and loyal PopConners are asking questions in this direction about what might be left of the Conservative Party. I mean, some still think it could bounce back and reform's a bubble, but I mean, there's a lot of questions about what synergies there might be. So Lynn Joyce, for example, says, I think it's very unlikely that Kemi Badenoch could unite the right or even win back lost Conservative members should she be replaced. If Jenrick were to replace Badenoch, would the parties cooperate, and who would lead, Farage or Jenrick? I mean, I guess that opens into a wider question on a lot of Conservatives are asking about what should the relationship be between Reform and the Conservatives. Jacob Rees-Mogg, for example, has suggested there should be an electoral pact. I was up in Scarborough in North Yorkshire with him, and he fleshed that out quite a lot. I hope to be able to put the audio of that online soon. I mean, I would also be interested to see in questions from Conservatives, what do you think the relationship should be? I've been following our WhatsApp group today, and a good number of Conservatives have sort of, said Danny Kruger, well, you go swing, you turncoat, but others have said, actually, this just proves how vitally important it is for us to all work together. So imagine, even in its depleted state, Gawain, that there's either a change in how Badenoch approaches things, or there's a change in leadership of the Conservative Party. Do you think there's any synergy there to work together? You were mentioning you've got a form of government, Danny Kruger, very plausible possible cabinet minister, but you probably need some others. Or is it get on board ship reform, get on board fast? If you're a good egg, we'll welcome you. If you want to stay in the Conservative Party, you're piloting a completely different course, and more or less to hell with you. We're going to be one party. We're not going to have any pacts, deals, or arrangements. We're going to try and win outright. Which is it?
We're certainly going to try and win outright, without a shadow of doubt. Could I see a situation where, in a post-electoral sort of devastation, the sort of post-apocalyptic landscape of the Conservative Party after the next general election, could I see a rump Tories becoming sort of like the Liberal Unionists in the 1890s, a sort of Jenrick as a sort of Joe Chamberlain bringing his raggle-taggle army to over with him, because I can't see someone like Robert Jenrick wanting to be the leader of a rump party. He doesn't want. I mean, this is not a man who's going to spend his time on trampolines and going down water flumes as a third party leader. I could possibly see him bringing a small handful over with him, but it could work there are all sorts of ways. You could have a coupon situation, things like that. But before the election, nothing.
Well, a coupon would be at the elections, you mean, right? That you might say, I'm putting words in your mouth, but you might say, actually, Jenrick is
you're right. So coupon's probably the wrong term, but I can see that possibility. I mean, there were ways things have been done in the past that might work quite effectively, but before the election, I just don't see it happening. Maybe. No, the only people talking about pacts and deals are Tories.
Yeah, of course.
There's nobody in Reform who's interested at all. And Isaiah put out something today basically saying the curtains are closing. If you want to, get on with it.
Well, I think he actually said people are deserting the ship and there are very few lifeboats left. Wasn't that the turn of phrase he used?
That was the term he used. But the point being is that, and there are those I'm in conversation with who've been humming and hawing for a while. Well, get on with it, mate. If you really want to, but that doesn't mean, and there's a couple of people. It's a case of, because they were candidates at the last election, and they were working for the Conservative cause, they were fighting against reformers, and so their local reformers aren't overly keen on them.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the beast. Politics is like that. I mean, everybody who defects to any party will have, as Lee did, and as I know, Danny did, and it's something we're going to talk about. But when people defect, there's always quotes of them being rude about the party they've just defected to.
Yeah, so in fact, Danny Kruger said in July that something along the lines of, I haven't got it verbatim, sorry, but that Farage and Reform want to spend like drunken sailors. Their natural coalition partners would be the Liberal Democrats. I'd love to know what the odds are on a Reform Lib Dem coalition after the next election. Pretty long, I would have thought.
Quite long, I would suggest. It's quite long.
But this sort of ties in. Jeff Mitchell asked, why are Reform so keen to recruit so many failed Conservatives? You've touched on this, Gawain, sort of saying, well, you do actually need to win. But goes on to ask, do they expect these turncoats to show total loyalty to Reform? I'd be worried. A few people in the chat have asked me whether I would join Reform. I mean, I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool partisan. I just want a vehicle to produce a right of centre government.
Well, I joined the tribe back in 2001. No, about 2004. Sorry.
Yeah.
And I had stood for the Tories a couple of times. I think I've proven over the last decade or some that loyalty is there, but my loyalty is cause loyalty.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing, I think, as well, that to some degree, I totally understand it. I mean, I'm still a member of the Conservative Party, but I totally understand that there is a certain practicality here, right? So I compare and contrast it with my loyalty to Southampton Football Club. If Southampton are relegated to Beezer Home League's Division 6, I will still support them. But a political party is supposed to be a vehicle to form a government, right? And I'm interested in who can form a government. And one could argue that over the last decade, 20, 30, well, over the last 200 years, the best vehicle on the right has been the Conservative Party. But it may no longer be that. And it seems to me that, Kruger was making an ideological point, but also a practical one. Adam Holloway
he made a very practical point in his press conference. He was basically making that very point. He was saying, why did he join? Because if you want to see a centre-right government taking conservative ideals and ideas about family, country, community, about a smaller state, about lower taxes, about all that good stuff, decent defence, decent law and order, all that good stuff, then you need to be in power.
Yeah.
And right now, and I think it may be a tipping point, a permanent tipping point, that vehicle is no longer the Conservative Party. I think of Disraeli's comment about the Treasury front bench, this row of extinct volcanoes, and I look at the Tories and I see a row of extinct volcanoes. Some of them never made it to foothills, frankly, but anyway, that is what I see.
Here's a breakdown of our audience, just to give you a feel for it. So. 28% of our audience are members of the Conservative Party and say they will stick with the Tory Party. 23% say they are members of the Tory Party but may leave. 35% are members of Reform UK and are sticking with Reform UK. 5% say they're members of Reform UK but may leave. I'd be intrigued to hear from any of you guys. And 9% are none, other, or both, right? I don't know which category I'm most interested in, the 9% or the 5%. We might actually put up, which is, I guess, a bigger test. And don't worry, they're all anonymized. We're not going to turn any of you in. Who would you actually vote for?
Tell me. I want to know.
Who would you vote for if there was a general election?
Their social media profiles.
Yeah. Who would you vote for? We'll put a survey up after that. Would you vote Conservative, Reform? You can't vote both, right? So other or don't know on this question. Now, moving forward a little bit, there's a few people who've asked about. Okay, let's roll forward to 2029. Imagine the polls, broadly in the position they are now. There's a kind of political earthquake, a once in a century event. The Labour Party are smashed. The Conservatives are decimated. Farage has got a majority of 150 or something. He's swept into Westminster on this sort of tidal wave of new reform support. I mean, it would be something we would never witnessed in our lifetimes, a party coming from, virtually nowhere.
Not in our electoral history.
Yeah, I mean, it hasn't happened, I think. So, yeah, I mean, it would be epic. But then it
just hasn't happened.
Yeah, it just hasn't happened. I mean, it actually took Labour sort of, 20 years to move from a couple of seats to winning. But, things move faster these days. So we're in, and this goes a bit back to, we're in with a sort of centre-right majority. I don't know. Let's assume Farage wins outright rather than there's any coalition or anything.
Yeah.
But this is when the headache begins. I mean, I know everybody says when they win an election, the hard work starts tomorrow. There's an awful lot of hard work in winning an election.
But it does.
Right. So I'm not suggesting that politicians of parties of any stripe should put that to one side. Clearly, it's a mammoth task, and especially to win a general election, if from a base of 5 MPs and 14% of the vote at the last election. So I'm not sort of saying that can be taken for read. But let's just, as a thought experiment, forward wind. There's a reform majority, a substantial reform majority. How are these problems going to be tackled? So Damien Chinalal asks, how will reform address the obstacles that might impact its ability to deliver its mandate if elected? The Blairite constitutional reforms, the blog, prior legislation that might bind reform. Gerard Andrew asks, do you think, I just missed that question. I'll ask my other people not to remove questions, please, so I can keep my eyes on them. Gerard asks, will reform sack uncooperative and obstructive civil servants? If they can't, will legislation be brought in on day one to ensure they can? Would it be a good idea to line up competent people to slot into senior civil service positions if necessary?
Yes.
Martin Bristow asks, how will preparation for coming into government proceed? Who will be involved? Will the repeal of the Human Rights Act be planned for? Ralph Goodley says, nice shirt, Mark. You do these events well. I've recommended that others join us, both Conservative and Reform. Well, that's very kind, Ralph, but probably doesn't address the national emergency that will face an incoming government in 2029. I mean, it is a colossal task, and there are some examples in recent history of it being done badly, right? So you could say the Liz Truss effort was to reset government, and it unravelled, and PhDs will be written
have
about
an electoral mandate to do it.
Didn't have a mandate to do it. That's true, and probably
Didn't have an electoral mandate to do it.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But also possibly underestimated the opposition she would face from the entrenched state, right? I'm not saying it's right for like
to do. We don't have the luxury. We're not in power. We're not blinded by that.
Yes, but I think someone like Liz would say, but be prepared for it. She was sort of the view, when I'm prime minister, if I pull this lever, something will happen, and it didn't. She wasn't pulling levers; she was pushing string.
We are the sort of party who many or most of our members have once been members of the Boy Scouts, and you know what the motto is, don't you?
Be prepared. Be
prepared. And we have to be. It is utterly essential. The Danny coming over, that's his job.
Yeah.
Is the be prepared job. I mean, and I don't think it's whittling sticks. I don't think it's learning how to tie a reef knot. But I do think that it is absolutely essential. If you look at what the think tank, this arms length think tank is talking about, it's 40% policy, 40% delivery, and 20% training. Because we don't just have to we have to train 3,500 people.
Mm-hmm.
That's essential, because you don't just have 450 members of parliament. You need about 500 lords. You need spads. You need advisors. You need staff, and they all have to have backbones, because it's going to be really tough. Personally, I think we're going to have a general strike in the first 2 weeks of reform-led government.
Mm-hmm.
The judiciary will go off the rails. Much of the media, academe, you name it, these are not natural bedfellows. I mean, if you ask the House of Lords the question, any political question, to which the answer is a reform-led Nigel Farage government, there is no question to which the House of Lords will accept that is the answer. These people feel that they are there in order to protect the people of our country from their base democratic instincts.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Therefore, we have to be absolutely prepared and detail Human Rights Act. Absolutely. When it comes to, I was on GB News on Friday arguing with Barry Gardner about this, and he was saying, one of the wonders of our country is our independent and neutral civil service, and this sort of the belly laughs. That's a nice pious dream. It probably finished in 1947, and it's certainly been accelerated. The civil service is absolutely politicized right now, and being honest about that is something that's essential, because what reform have to do going into the next general election is actually be honest. Where Labour got it wrong, not only did Sue Gray not have a plan, and they all thought she did, but they lied their way to the general election. They didn't need to. They were going to win anyhow. But they
Yes, this
lied.
is an interesting trade-off, isn't there? Because there's a question of how explicit you are in your manifesto. So if you explicitly say, for example, we will repeal the Human Rights Act, it is harder. I'm not saying they wouldn't try for the House of Lords to block that. Whereas if you say there will be an overview of human rights legislation, then the House of Lords could say, well, you didn't really win a mandate. You know, supposedly if it's in your manifesto.
I think, well, as I go around the country and doing all these public meetings, and I think I'm going to Poole on Thursday, and so on and so forth. But what I find is that the Overton window is on rails. It is moving so fast, not just on immigration, but on the economy, on welfare, on you name it, across the board. The mood is getting stronger. And if we go into the next election after following 3 years of Labour's economic brilliance, the state of the nation will be such, I believe, that to be brutally honest about some of the things we have to do may well, and I think it is worth our while, I think we will win anyhow, even if we are brutally honest. That does mean it's not going to be easy, good Lord. But I think we can trust the British public to understand how bad things are. I think it's fascinating to see how over the last 5 years, the mood towards net zero has changed colossally. Reform, Brexit Party, and UKIP before it have been climate skeptics. And I remember many years ago, Nigel saying, look, Gawain, yes, we are. Yes, we believe this. We think it's rubbish. We think what they're doing is ghastly. But this is not a political hill I can die on, because right now, 95% of the population think that we're all going to disappear in a great heat storm.
Yes, I remember asking Nigel about 10 years ago whether it was true that UKIP members didn't believe in climate change because the ice hadn't melted in their gin and tonics yet. And that was it was seen as a marginal thing. But you know, no, I agree. All of that has moved somewhat, actually quite dramatically. The Overton window has moved. Yeah. But a lot of that for the preparation for government, I mean, that might explain why Reform could win a general election, right? But in terms of kind of, day one, hour one, minute one, it's not just going to have to be to get the policies right. I mean, frankly, in legislative terms, repealing the Human Rights Act is not particularly difficult. You can pass a one-line bill saying we repeal the Human Rights Act of 1998. I mean, you might have all sorts of opposition in the Lords, but nevertheless, it doesn't require unbelievable drafting. There's more of a politically nuanced problem about how you sequence things. Is the first thing the Human Rights Act, or is the first thing dealing with the civil service, or is the first thing getting the economy stabilized, or is the first thing
or stripping Quangos of their irresponsibility?
Correct. Yeah,
something
you can do more than one thing at a time. You can't do everything all at once.
Well, maybe you can.
Maybe you can.
You bring in a great restore bill, and you basically bring in a very brief but quite serious great restore bill, and essentially you start afresh. You take us back to a point and say, right, from here, and we move forward. And this is something David Starkey's talked about. This is something other people are talking about. This I hear from Legatum, I hear from our Prosperity Institute, I hear from elsewhere. But this is why we have to be honest with the British public about how bad things have got and what we plan to do about it. Because only with a mandate to be radical, and it was interesting, Danny's comments, we are not revolutionary, we are radical.
And we're about restoration, not revolution. I mean, David Starkey must have been punching the air at that point. It's about a restoration, not a revolution. Yeah,
absolutely. But do you start in 1992? Do you start in 1997? Some people I've heard want to start in 1660. But basically, well, but the point is,
I don't think I'd roll back the enfranchisement of women on the voting register, to be honest. But
no, true. But there are certain things. But the point is, there is much of our legislation that has been imposed, and this sort of Blairite, the genius of Blair was to constitutionalize politics and take it out of democratic control. The genius, what we must do, is to bring everything back into democratic control, because everything is political. Everything the government does should be decided and spends money on should be decided by the public. End. And right now, so much of this country is governed by people we cannot control, and we must. So
I
Quangos
completely agree with
must
that
go into
description.
the power of ministers, and ministers must take responsibility for them. They screw up, they take the bullet.
Yeah.
And that is essential if we are going to regain the trust of the British people. That we
I agree with that.
trust
And I
them.
think it's also important to admit that it could be tough, not just the political battle, but there's going to have to be a lot of rewiring of our economy, right? And when you rewire something,
you've got to pull it out with a corkscrew.
And usually, if you go through an economic transformation, usually, the first year or two, you go backwards a bit. It's a bit like starting a new job. If you start a new job, you're not as productive on day one as you were in your previous job, right? So there's a period of transition that probably won't immediately produce massive economic growth because you've got to rewire everything.
And I tell the story of Mark Lahr. Don't you remember him?
Oh yeah.
And
but tell our audience, I know he was the Estonian prime minister. Is that right?
Mark Lahr was a history teacher who found himself the leader of the anti-Soviet movement in Estonia.
Yeah.
And in 1989, he becomes prime minister. Now, this is a proper tabula rasa. This is a non-Soviet government in a Soviet state. And so that talk about that really is. Nobody knows what they're doing. Nobody have done this before whatsoever. You've got a prime minister who's a history teacher. But he came up with a deeply radical agenda for his government, including a flat tax, including this, that, and the other. And his chief, I remember talking to him about 10 years later, and his chief political advisor said, "But Mr. Lahr, you can't bring this in. Why? Because you won't get re-elected." And his response was, "I don't care. I want to change the country for better. I don't get elected to be re-elected. I get elected to make the country better." And what's interesting, even today, Estonia outperforms the other Baltic states because of the reforms he did. And no, he didn't get re-elected. So there is that we're not here to get re-elected. We're not here to become comfortable on our green benches. We are here to restore our country and bring it back to a sense of freedom, justice, poverty, prosperity, and all that stuff that we can do if we have the courage.
I mean, from whatever the colour of rosette, I would rather have 5 years of doing something than 14 years of doing nothing.
And they're getting a period at the end. Well done.
Just let you know on that, if there was a general election today, which party would you vote for? This is interesting. Doesn't quite map the party membership. Those of us still in the Conservative Party, we're at 30%. Reform 66%. Other don't know 4%. So that again slightly shows.
Those of you who are thinking of voting for Zach Polanski, can you show them the door?
Now I just want to finish up because we got a last poll here. Irrespective of how you're going to vote, I just said there's about 2/3 on this call say they would vote for reform today. Only 30% for the Conservative Party. What do you actually think is going to happen? Whichever side of the ledger you're on, what do you think is going to happen? Is it going to be a reform majority, a reform minority, or coalition, a kind of Farage-led government, a Conservative majority, Conservative-led government, but not one with a majority? Or do you think Zach Polanski will win, or even more, or even less likely that Keir Starmer will be re-elected in a landslide? It'd be interesting to know your thoughts there. And quite a few people, Gawain, because Farage touched on this at the party conference, and again in his press conference with Danny Kruger today, saying that he thinks an early election is eminently possible. I must admit, but maybe I'm just thinking, I'm not thinking imaginatively enough. I'm not quite sure how we get there. I mean, you'd need to have a lot of turkeys voting for Christmas for there to be an early election to be called by Labour. A lot. I mean, I guess 75 Labour MPs could defect to the Corbyn Sultana party and the government loses its majority. So I can't quite see it, but nevertheless, your party leader seems to think there's a good chance of it, or at least saying that. How and why? Do you think there could be an election? I don't know, this year, next year, 2 years' time, rather than we go the full length to 2029? History tells us that governments in trouble cling on to the last moment. The only recent counterexample being Rishi Sunak.
Precisely. We have to wait for a decent rainstorm outside number 10. But we don't know, clearly. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 28. I think that there is a feeling, if there is a slight bobble in the polls, and Labour do something right, which I think is unlikely, but maybe they do. Who knows? History is weird. Then they, just as Rishi went early to stymie any chance of Nigel coming back and leading reform, and oops, that didn't work. Right now, reform are not ready.
Well, no one is, for Christ's sake. I mean, we're only...
Labour are in government. They are sort of ready. And so there is, if I was Labour, I'd be looking at, oh God, can we find, is there some window that where Reform haven't got their stuff together, and they clearly haven't got the policy agenda together. They haven't selected any candidates. They don't know who their candidates are. They don't know how they're going to do it when they're in there. Let's get it done fast. We can talk about Putin. We can talk about net zero. We can talk about whatever. They're going to close the NHS. They're going to sell it to Americans. Elon Musk is going to put chips in your brain. All this stuff. And so Labour might go, just if there's a blip in the polls where they I don't know, when they get over 25% again.
Interesting. But do you think there's any chance they might change the electoral system before the general election?
Yes.
And if Reform win, will you change the electoral system after the general election?
I would think unlikely, but we will see. The electoral reform, Nigel did support AV. The AV referendum.
So did I. I voted for AV.
Let's be honest, it was a bit 48-52. It was never a thing he was really keen on, but the egregious nature of 4 million votes for a UKIP MP, 56,000 votes for an SNP was just wrong. Whereas I think it would be interesting. Well, Richard Tice has always been.
You might say that Nigel's now of the mindset that he doesn't so much mind a party winning a major majority with less than 50% of the vote, right? In prevailing circumstances.
In prevailing circumstances, he'd be an idiot to think otherwise. And if we want to change the world, we've got to have that mandate. I do think it's possible that Labour will go for PR. They did pass it in their 22 national conference as a policy. Starmer said not now, because he'd won a massive majority. But I can see, because Reform are basically the political antithesis of everything the technocratic globalist idiots of Labour are, then if you are convinced you're going to get hammered in the election, how can you dig a heffalump trap for the people that you hate most? And PR would be a heffalump trap. But that being said, I don't know. In those circumstances, if you look at the polling, it is even possible at that point, your little poll you had earlier, a Reform majority government or a Reform Tory, in the Tories in the minority, well, that might be possible under PR. That might just be possible under PR. So right now, there are no shy DE Reform voters. They're damn proud of it. But there are still a lot of shy ABC Reform voters. I think the polls have probably marked us down 2%. So if we're on 32 to 35% or 31% of the rolling poll on polls, but are going up, then we're not that far from 40.
Yeah. Well, we didn't ask people to speculate on what the electoral system might be. I'm going to assume it's first past the post, but asking people to anticipate the result of the next election. Here are the numbers from our audience. 61% of you predict a Reform UK majority. 26% of you predict a Reform UK minority or led coalition. 5% of you talk about keeping the faith, predict a Conservative Party majority. 4% of you predict a Conservative Party-led minority government or coalition. And 4% of you predict that neither the Conservatives nor Reform will be in government. We've probably got a few members of Advance UK on the call then, I'm guessing.
Well, yeah, fair enough.
So that's absolutely intriguing. Well, there's a huge amount to think about, a huge amount to be done. Gawain, look, we've overrun our time. Thanks so much for your insight. It's been absolutely fascinating. I look forward to catching up for a few bevies soon. I think Reform UK is giving true Conservatives an awful lot to think about. You've achieved, I dare say, victory has many fathers and defeat is an orphan. But you personally and your party have achieved stunning things objectively. Not just
I'm still an orphan,
election, but since. It's great that even if we're members of different political parties, there's an awful lot to agree on. And my approach is if we can actually get sound and sane people to agree what needs to be done to fix the country, then we'll find a way to do it. And I think we can count on the British people to support us. So, Gawain, it's been a real pleasure.
As I was saying, we have to trust them because we asked them to trust us.
Exactly right. Exactly right. And too often the electorate have been taken for granted or treated with contempt, or even in the case of the Brexit referendum, the enormous attempts to have their will overridden. That's got to end. I think we're on the same page that the first thing we've got to do is to re-establish a proper working democracy in the United Kingdom, because in effect, we've allowed that to slip through our fingers and power to be transferred away from the people's representatives into a whole bunch of people we can't apparently get rid of. But the ballot box is a way of getting rid of people, and ultimately Parliament is sovereign. It's just going to have to reset the rules of the game to ensure
Remind itself that
democracy
it is.
So, Gawain, it's been a great pleasure. Just before, and thank you to our audience. I got through as many questions as you can. I batched them as well as you can. Sorry I couldn't get through all of them. Just to remind you, we're now back after a long summer break. My fault, I had a long summer holiday. But we do have our next pop conversation. That's with the Shadow Secretary of State for Business and Trade, Andrew Griffith MP. That's not on our usual Monday. That's next Thursday at 7 p.m. The registration for that's in the webinar chat. Reformers, Conservatives, all welcome. So if you haven't signed up for that and you'd be interested in firing some questions or listening to my questions to Andrew Griffith, I intend to go pretty hard on the Conservatives' economic record in government, then please join, link in the chat. Also, I guess most of you are here because you found out about this event through our weekly newsletter, but if for some reason you found out through some other mechanism, please do join our weekly newsletter. We don't spam you, but every Friday, usually every Friday, we send you an update of our thoughts on the week's events and what's happening. Again, link in the chat. Great pleasure, Gawain, as always. I'm sorry I was only on the water while you were on the gin and tonic, but let's meet up face to face.
I only ran away once.
Let's meet up soon for a gin and tonic. And to all of you who've joined the call, we have way more than 100 of you on the call live. Thanks very much for joining us.